Rain hammered against concrete like bullets from heaven as he stood at the edge of a bridge, trembling not from cold but from the hand gripping his shoulder. Behind him, a woman's voice cut through the storm, soft, almost gentle, the way poison tastes sweet before it kills. "Your father left you everything," she whispered. "But he forgot about me." One push. That's all it took. One violent shove and gravity did the rest. His scream tore through the night as his body plummeted toward black water that waited like an open grave. The ocean swallowed him whole, and the woman above watched until the waves erased every trace. Then she walked back to her car, started the engine, and drove home to a house that now belonged only to her. 15 years later, a man walked through those same city streets. His face bore scars the ocean had carved into him. His eyes held secrets that would make grown men weep. His name was Daniel, though for a long time he'd forgotten what it meant to be called anything at all. And he had come back, not with a knife or a gun, not with rage or hatred. He came back with something far more dangerous, the truth. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. That night changed everything. But what his stepmother didn't know, what she couldn't have known as she drove away from that bridge with rain washing blood from her conscience, was that the ocean doesn't just take. Sometimes when the moon is right and the tide pulls a certain way, it gives back. The newspapers called it a tragedy. Teenager lost in storm, body never found. His photograph appeared on evening news broadcasts for exactly 3 days before the world moved on to fresher horrors. Missing persons posters faded on telephone poles. His stepmother wore black to a memorial service where she cried real tears, the kind that come from relief rather than grief. But somewhere in the cold darkness beneath those waves, something else was happening. A current was moving. A hand was reaching. And a boy who should have died was learning the first and most important lesson of his second life. That survival isn't about strength. It's about refusing to let go when every part of you screams to surrender. The questions that haunted that night would take 15 years to answer. How does a child survive what should have killed him? Why would someone who promised to love him want him dead? And what happens when the dead walk back into the lives of those who buried them? To understand that night on the bridge, you have to go back to when Daniel's father, Raymond, brought home a woman named Patricia and introduced her as someone who would make their lives better. Raymond was a good man, the kind who worked 2 jobs to keep his son in a decent school, who never missed a parent-teacher conference, who taught Daniel that character mattered more than money. He'd been alone since Daniel's mother died when the boy was 7, and loneliness does strange things to a man's judgment. Patricia arrived like springtime after a hard winter. She was beautiful in that careful way some women perfect. Every hair in place, every smile calculated to land exactly where it needed to. She brought casseroles to their modest home in Baltimore. She laughed at Raymond's jokes. She asked Daniel about his day with what seemed like genuine interest. Within 6 months they were married. Within a year she transformed from stranger to family. Or so it appeared. Daniel tried. God knows he tried. He called her Patricia at first, then Pat when she said it made her feel old. He included her in conversations. He cleaned his room without being asked. He wanted to make his father happy, and if this woman made Raymond smile again, then Daniel would accept her. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when he'd catch something in her eyes. A coldness that appeared when Raymond wasn't looking. A tightness around her mouth when Daniel received praise or attention. A way she'd watch him sometimes like someone calculating the value of furniture before an estate sale. Raymond didn't see it. Love blinds us to the things we don't want to see. He was too busy being grateful that his son had a mother figure again, too busy building the family he thought they'd lost. He worked hard, saved harder. He bought a small building in a neighborhood that was just starting to gentrify, fixed it up, rented out the units. He opened a modest investment account. He wasn't wealthy by any means, but he was building something solid, something that would outlast him. Then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The kind that moves through your body like wildfire through dry brush. Raymond fought it with everything he had, but some battles aren't meant to be won. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. 6 months of Patricia playing the devoted wife, bringing him water, adjusting his pillows, whispering words of comfort while Daniel sat in the hallway and tried not to cry loud enough for his father to hear. The will reading happened on a Tuesday morning in November. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Patricia wore a black dress and pearl earrings. Daniel wore the only suit he owned, too small now in the shoulders because he'd grown 2 inches that year. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading words that would seal Daniel's fate. Raymond had left everything to his son. The building, the investments, a life insurance policy worth $300,000, all of it placed in a trust that would transfer to Daniel when he turned 18. Patricia received the house and a small monthly allowance for acting as Daniel's guardian until he reached adulthood. It was fair, reasonable, exactly what any father would do to protect his child's future. Patricia's face didn't change as the lawyer read the terms. She nodded politely. She signed the papers. She drove Daniel home in silence. But that night, through the thin walls of their house, Daniel heard her on the phone with someone. Her voice carried a sharp edge he'd never heard before. 2 years, she hissed. I have to wait 2 years and then it's gone. All of it. After everything I put up with, I get to be his babysitter and then walk away with nothing. Daniel lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt something cold settle in his chest. Fear, yes, but something else too. Understanding. All those smiles, all that kindness, it had been an investment, and she'd just found out her returns were far less than anticipated. He started sleeping with his door locked after that. Started paying attention to what he ate and drank. Started trusting his instincts instead of trying to talk himself out of them. But even instinct couldn't prepare him for what came next. Patricia didn't rage or threaten. She became sweeter, more attentive. She made his favorite meals. She asked about his plans for college. She acted like the mother she'd pretended to be all along. And Daniel, still just a kid who'd lost his father and wanted to believe people were basically good, began to relax. That was his mistake. The night started ordinary. Patricia said she needed to run errands and asked if Daniel wanted to come along. He'd been in his room studying for a chemistry exam, but something in her voice made him say yes. Call it intuition. Call it that animal part of our brain that still knows how to smell danger. He grabbed his jacket and followed her to the car. They drove through the city as evening settled over Baltimore like a heavy blanket. Patricia made small talk about the weather, about Thanksgiving plans, about nothing that mattered. But she kept driving, past the grocery store, past the pharmacy, out toward the water. Daniel's unease grew with every mile. Where are we going? He asked. There's something I want to show you, she said. Something beautiful. They crossed the bridge that connected the city to the eastern shore. Wind buffeted the car. Dark clouds rolled in from the Atlantic, heavy with rain. Patricia pulled over at a scenic overlook that jutted out over the water. In summer, families came here for picnics. In November, at dusk, it was deserted. Come look, she said, stepping out into the wind. Daniel followed, every nerve in his body screaming. The rain started, fat drops that hit like accusations. Patricia walked to the railing and stared down at the water 50 feet below. The ocean churned, dark and hungry. Your father loved this spot, she said. He brought me here once. Told me that when he looked at the ocean he felt small in a good way. Like his problems didn't matter compared to something that vast. I remember, Daniel said, though he didn't. He was trying to figure out how to get back to the car. She turned to face him then, and her mask finally slipped. No more sweet smiles. No more pretend warmth. Just cold calculation and something that might have been regret if it had any real feeling behind it. Your father left you everything, she said. But he forgot about me. 3 years of my life, Daniel. 3 years of pretending to care about a sad man and his needy son. 3 years of playing house and cooking dinners and listening to him talk about his dead wife. And for what? To be a babysitter until you turn 18 and take everything that should be mine. The house is yours, Daniel said, backing up. The allowance. The house. She laughed, harsh and sharp. The house is mortgaged. The allowance is barely enough to cover utilities. Do you understand what I gave up for this? I could have married men with real money. I could have had a life. Instead, I got your father's charity. Lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled across the water. The rain intensified, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Patricia moved closer. Daniel's back hit the railing. I'm sorry, he said, though he didn't know what he was apologizing for. For existing, maybe. For being his father's son. I know you are, she said almost gently. Then her hand shot out and shoved him backward with surprising strength. He grabbed for the railing, but his hands slipped on wet metal. His feet lost contact with solid ground. He fell. The fall seemed to last forever and no time at all. Wind screamed in his ears. Rain pelted his face. He saw the water rushing up to meet him and had one clear thought. This is how I die. He hit the ocean like hitting concrete. Pain exploded through his body, air driven from his lungs, consciousness flickering. Cold water rushed into his mouth and nose. The current grabbed him and pulled him under, down into darkness where light couldn't reach. He thrashed, fighting instinct even though his mind had already accepted death. His lungs burned. His vision narrowed to a pinpoint. This is where most drowning victims give up. This is where the body, starved of oxygen, stops fighting and accepts the inevitable. But Daniel didn't give up. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was rage at the injustice of dying for someone else's greed. Maybe it was his father's voice in his head from years ago, telling him that giving up was never an option. Whatever the reason, he kicked. He clawed. He fought his way toward where he thought the surface might be. His hand broke through. His face followed. He gasped air and water and vomited and gasped again. A wave pushed him under. He surfaced again, weaker now, colder. The current had pulled him away from the bridge. He could barely make out lights in the distance through the rain. His body was shutting down from cold and shock and injury. He tried to swim, but his arms wouldn't cooperate. The ocean pulled him under again. This time he didn't have the strength to fight back. The darkness closed over him like a coffin lid, and he sank into it gratefully, finally ready to let go. His last conscious thought was an apology to his father for not being strong enough to survive. If this story has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still watching right now." Let's see who's truly following till the end. But the ocean wasn't finished with him. Sometimes fate intervenes in ways we can't explain. Some people would call it divine intervention. Others would call it dumb luck. Daniel would later come to think of it as the ocean choosing, deciding that his story wasn't finished, that his purpose hadn't been fulfilled. A fishing boat called the Morning Star was running late, heading back to harbor. Captain Ellis Wright, a man who'd spent 40 years reading the water's moods, had pushed his luck staying out too long chasing a school of rockfish. The storm had rolled in faster than predicted, and now he was racing the weather home with his first mate, a quiet man named Samuel who'd once told Ellis that the ocean speaks to those willing to listen. Samuel saw him first. Not the body, not at first, but something wrong with the way the water was moving in one spot. A disturbance that didn't match the wave patterns. He pointed without speaking. Ellis cut the engine and brought the boat around. There, floating face down in the water, was what looked like a boy. They hauled him aboard using the gaff hook, careful not to cause more damage. No pulse. No breath. Lips blue as bruises. Ellis started CPR while Samuel radioed the Coast Guard. 2 minutes of compressions. Nothing. 3 minutes. 4. Most people would have given up. Ellis had pulled too many drowned men from these waters to have much hope. But Samuel kept saying, "Not yet. Not yet." On the 5th minute, Daniel's body convulsed. Water erupted from his mouth and nose. He gasped, choked, gasped again. His eyes opened but didn't focus. He was alive but barely. They wrapped him in every blanket on the boat and pushed the engine as hard as it would go toward shore. The hospital staff called it a miracle. 15 minutes in water that cold should have caused irreversible brain damage even if the drowning didn't kill him. But Daniel opened his eyes 3 days later in a hospital room with no idea where he was or how he'd gotten there. The doctors ran tests. Concussion, 3 broken ribs, hypothermia, water in his lungs. But alive. Impossibly, inexplicably alive. The problem came when they asked his name. He told them, Daniel Patterson. He told them about Patricia, about the bridge, about being pushed. 2 police officers came to his bedside and listened with expressions that grew increasingly skeptical. They made phone calls. They came back with news that didn't make sense. There was no missing persons report. Patricia had reported him as a runaway, not a drowning victim. She told authorities that Daniel had been troubled since his father's death, that he'd threatened to run away multiple times, that she'd done everything she could but sometimes love wasn't enough. She'd played the role of devastated stepmother perfectly. There was no evidence of foul play. No witnesses. Just the troubled teenager's wild accusation against a grieving widow. The police left his hospital room with promises to investigate that sounded like polite dismissals. Daniel lay in that bed and understood with terrible clarity. No one was coming to save him. No one would believe a 16-year-old over a respectable woman with tears in her eyes. If he went back, if he tried to claim his inheritance, if he pushed too hard, she would find another way. Another bridge, another accident. Next time he might not have a fishing boat to pull him from the deep. Captain Ellis visited him every day. They didn't talk much at first. Ellis would sit in the chair beside the bed and read his newspaper while Daniel stared at the ceiling. But on the 5th day, as they were preparing to discharge him to foster care, Ellis finally spoke. "My wife died 8 years ago," he said without preamble. "Cancer. We never had children, couldn't, not for lack of trying. Boat's been my family since then. But a boat's a lonely family." Daniel turned his head to look at the old man. "What I'm saying is," Ellis continued, "you need a place to be. and I've got more room than I need. Samuel and we work the boat together. He's teaching me to see the water the way he does. Maybe we could teach you too." "Why would you do that?" Daniel asked. Ellis folded his newspaper carefully. "Because the ocean gave you back. That means something. And because I've got a feeling about you, son. You're meant for something more than what tried to kill you." So Daniel Patterson died that day, at least officially. The boy who'd been pushed from a bridge and nearly drowned disappeared into bureaucratic cracks. In his place emerged someone new, David Ellis, named after the man who'd saved him and the life he'd left behind. No social security number, no paper trail, just a ghost living on a fishing boat and learning what it meant to start over. Samuel taught him the rhythms of the ocean. How to read weather in the taste of the wind. How to mend nets with patience and precision. How to spot fish by the way light reflected off scales below the surface. Ellis taught him different lessons. About integrity, about quiet strength, about how a man measures his worth not by what he owns but by what he's willing to sacrifice for others. The work was brutal. Up before dawn, hands raw from rope and salt, muscles screaming from hauling nets. But it was honest. No one on the boat cared about inheritance or property or who deserved what. They cared about pulling their weight, about watching each other's backs, about coming home safe at the end of the day. For the first time since his father died, Daniel felt like he belonged somewhere. The nightmares came anyway. Almost every night for the first year. He'd wake gasping, feeling water in his lungs, seeing Patricia's face as she pushed him. Samuel heard him once, thrashing in his bunk. The older man didn't say anything, just sat beside him until the shaking stopped. "The ocean remembers everything," Samuel said quietly. "Every ship that sank. Every sailor lost. Every secret thrown into the depths. It doesn't forget, but it doesn't hold grudges either. Just holds. Eventually, you have to decide if you're going to let it hold you under or let it hold you up." Years passed. Daniel grew into David. The boy's softness hardened into a man's lean strength. He learned navigation, boat repair, small business management. Ellis eventually made him a partner in the fishing operation. They expanded, bought a second boat, hired a small crew. David proved to have a head for business that surprised everyone, including himself. He remembered his father's lessons about investment and building for the future. The difference was, he was building something real, something earned through sweat and skill rather than inherited. He dated occasionally. Nothing serious. How could he explain to someone that he was living under a false name? That half his life was a lie. That somewhere in Baltimore, a woman who tried to murder him was probably still living in his father's house? He kept people at arm's length emotionally even as he learned to trust his crew with his life. It was Samuel who first suggested he might want to look back. They were 11 years into David's new life. He was 27, tanned and scarred and capable. They sat on the deck of the Morning Star watching the sun set over water that had tried to kill him all those years ago. "You ever think about going back?" Samuel asked. "Every day," David admitted. "But what's the point? Everything's gone by now. The statute of limitations on attempted murder in Maryland is 3 years. She's untouchable." "Maybe," Samuel said. "Or maybe justice works on a different timeline than law." That conversation planted a seed. David started doing research. In the age of the internet, it wasn't hard to find information if you knew where to look. He found Patricia easily enough. She was living well, very well. She'd remarried twice after Raymond. The first husband died in a car accident after 2 years. The second died of a heart attack after 18 months. Both men had been older, successful, isolated. Both had left their estates to their loving widow. The pattern was obvious once you saw it. Patricia wasn't just a murderer. She was a serial killer, the kind that operates in plain sight because she chose victims society expected to die. Older men with health problems. Tragic accidents. Natural causes. No one investigated too closely when an elderly man with a bad heart succumbed in his sleep. David dug deeper, and what he found chilled him more than any ocean water. There were earlier marriages too before Raymond. A total of 3 husbands over 15 years. All 3 dead. She'd refined her method over time. She'd gotten better at choosing targets, at playing the grieving widow, at walking away with bank accounts and property deeds. His father hadn't been her first victim. Daniel hadn't been her first attempt at eliminating an obstacle. He'd just been the first one to survive. The realization hit him like a physical blow. All those years, he'd thought about revenge in personal terms. About what she'd done to him, to his father, to his inheritance. But this was bigger. She was still out there. Still hunting. Still looking for her next mark. How many more men would die before someone stopped her? He sat with that knowledge for 6 months. Alice and Samuel watched him wrestle with it, saw the way it changed him. The easy laughter that had finally returned to his face disappeared again. He became focused, driven, obsessed with a question that had no easy answer. What do you do when the law can't touch someone and your silence means more innocent people will die? Samuel finally asked him straight, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," David said. "I'm not a killer. I'm not going to become what she is." "Then what?" "Then I go back," David said slowly, the plan forming as he spoke. "Not as Daniel, not as someone looking for revenge. I go back as David Ellis, successful businessman, completely by chance crossing paths with Patricia. I watch her. I document. I find proof. And I stop her the right way." "The right way might not feel as satisfying as the wrong way," Ellis warned. "I know," David said. "But it's the only way I can live with." So he started planning. It took 2 years to build a legitimate business presence in Baltimore. He bought a small commercial fishing operation that supplied restaurants along the harbor. He established himself as David Ellis, entrepreneur, someone with connections and credibility. He created a paper trail that would hold up to scrutiny. He learned patience from the ocean, how to wait for the right current, the right moment. And then, when everything was in place, he engineered an introduction. Patricia was on the board of a charity that supported maritime industries. David donated a substantial amount and attended a fundraising gala. He watched her work the room, older now, her beauty maintained through expensive procedures, but still magnetic, still dangerous. She didn't recognize him. Why would she? The boy she'd pushed from that bridge had been thin, soft, uncertain. The man standing before her was broad-shouldered and confident. She smiled at him with practiced charm and shook his hand. Her palm was cool and dry. His didn't tremble. "David Ellis," he introduced himself. "I've heard wonderful things about your work with the foundation." "Patricia Montgomery," she said, using her latest married name. "The pleasure is mine. You're the one who started with a single fishing boat and built an empire. That's the kind of story I love, someone who creates success from nothing." "We all start from somewhere," he said smoothly. "Some of us just have farther to climb. How would you feel if someone who destroyed your life came face to face with you and had no idea who you were? Tell us in the comments." The next year was the longest of David's life. He played a careful game, staying in Patricia's orbit without seeming too interested. He attended charity events where she appeared. He made business deals with her acquaintances. He slowly, methodically built a picture of her current life. She was between husbands. Her last one had died 8 months earlier, leaving her with a substantial estate. She was hunting again, he could tell. She attended social gatherings for wealthy older men. She volunteered at organizations where successful retirees gathered. He watched her target a man named Albert Chin, a 72-year-old widower who'd sold his restaurant chain and was looking for meaning in his retirement years. Patricia zeroed in with practiced efficiency. Within 3 months they were dating. Within 6, engaged. David watched it happen with growing horror and frustration. The police had listened politely to his concerns about Patricia's pattern of dead husbands, but without concrete evidence of foul play, their hands were tied. Natural causes and accidents weren't crimes, no matter how suspicious the timing. Then Samuel did something David hadn't asked for or expected. The older man had connections in places David had never thought to look. Samuel had spent years working with various fishing communities up and down the coast. He knew people who knew people. And one of those people was a private investigator who specialized in insurance fraud. "Your stepmother didn't just kill these men," the investigator told David over coffee in a harborside cafe. "She's been defrauding insurance companies for over a decade. Every husband had substantial life insurance policies taken out shortly before their deaths. The patterns are there if you know what to look for. I've got documentation, paper trails. And I've got something else. Communication between Patricia and a man in Philadelphia who provides untraceable medications. Heart attack medications that can be dosed to cause cardiac arrest. Accident facilitators." David stared at the folder the investigator pushed across the table. Inside was everything needed to build a case. Not just suspicion. Proof. "Why hasn't anyone caught this before?" David asked. "Because no one was looking at the full picture. Each death in isolation looks innocent. It's only when you see them all together, when you see the pattern of insurance policies and offshore accounts and communication with the medication supplier, that it becomes obvious." The authorities moved slowly but thoroughly. They arrested Patricia on a Thursday morning at her home. The charges included multiple counts of murder, insurance fraud, attempted murder of a minor. The news coverage was extensive. The beautiful widow with 5 dead husbands and a teenage stepson she tried to drown. It had everything the media loved: beauty, betrayal, bodies. David watched the arrest from a distance. Heat provided evidence but kept his identity as Daniel Patterson sealed. The lawyers argued he deserved privacy given he'd been a minor at the time of the attack. The judge agreed. To the public he remained anonymous, Victim A, the boy who'd survived. The trial took 8 months. David attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom where Patricia wouldn't notice him. He watched her defense crumble piece by piece as prosecutors laid out her history. He watched jurors' faces change from skepticism to horror as they understood what she'd done, how many times she'd done it, how close she'd come to doing it again. When they read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Patricia finally looked behind her. Her eyes swept the courtroom and landed on David. For just a moment, recognition flickered across her face. Not full understanding, but something. A sense that the young man in the back row mattered somehow. Then the bailiffs led her away, and David finally exhaled a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 15 years. Albert Chin approached him outside the courthouse. The old man looked shaken but grateful. "They told me you were the one who started the investigation," Albert said. "That you saved my life by stopping her before?" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I just made sure people were paying attention," David said. "Why?" Albert asked. "What did she do to you?" David looked at this elderly man who'd almost become victim number 6. "She taught me that survival isn't enough," he said. "You have to make it mean something. You have to use what you've learned to protect others." Albert nodded slowly. "The prosecutor mentioned a boy she pushed from a bridge. That was you, wasn't it?" David didn't answer directly. "That boy died a long time ago. Someone else climbed out of that ocean." 3 months after the trial, David stood on the same bridge where Patricia had pushed him. It was early morning, the ocean calm and silver under sunrise. Alice and Samuel stood beside him, patient as always. David had invited them to witness this moment, whatever it turned out to be. "I thought I'd feel different," David admitted. "Angrier or more satisfied or something. But I just feel tired." "That's because revenge exhausts you," Alice said. "Justice lets you rest." "What now?" Samuel asked. David looked out at the water that had nearly killed him and ultimately saved him. "Now I keep building. The business, relationships, a life. The ocean took the boy I was and gave back someone stronger. Seems wrong to waste that." "Your father would be proud," Alice said quietly. "Maybe," David said. "Or maybe he'd be disappointed I let so many years pass before stopping her. I could have done something sooner." "You were a child," Samuel reminded him. "Children aren't supposed to stop monsters. They're supposed to survive them and become better adults. That's what you did." They stood in silence for a while, watching light break across the water. Boats were heading out to sea, beginning their day's work. Somewhere in Baltimore, Patricia sat in a cell that would hold her for the rest of her life. And somewhere in that same city, Daniel Patterson's father rested in a grave that finally had justice keeping watch. David turned away from the railing. "Let's go home," he said. "We've got boats to run and fish to catch." As they walked back to the car, Samuel asked, "You ever going to reclaim your real name? Your inheritance?" David considered it. The legal battles would be complicated but not impossible. He could prove his identity, reclaim what Patricia had stolen. But the money that had nearly cost him his life seemed less important now than the life he'd built himself. "Maybe someday," he said. "But David Ellis earned what he has. Daniel Patterson inherited what he had. I think I prefer earning it." Patricia Montgomery sits in a Maryland state prison serving 5 consecutive life sentences. She'll die behind bars, her beauty fading, her manipulations useless against walls that don't care about tears or charm. The families of her victims finally have answers. Albert Chin eventually remarried a kind woman he met at a grief support group. They named their first grandchild Daniel, though David never told them why that made him smile. David, because he remains David, finding that the new name fits better than the old one ever did, expanded his business. He employs over 50 people now, most of them folks who needed a second chance the way he did. He married eventually, told his wife the whole truth on their 3rd date because he refused to build a relationship on lies. She listened to his story and said the 4 words that mattered most: "That wasn't your fault." Sometimes, on quiet mornings before the boats go out, David still walks down to the water's edge. He doesn't fear it anymore. The ocean stopped being his enemy the moment it chose to save rather than claim him. He understands now that it was never the ocean's fault. Water doesn't judge or scheme or betray. It simply is. How we survive it, how we use the survival, that's where the meaning lives. So here's the question for you. What would you have done? If someone pushed you off a bridge, left you to die, and you survived, would you want revenge or justice? Would you take back what was stolen or build something new? Could you look your attempted murderer in the eye 15 years later and choose the harder path instead of the easier one? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us how this story made you feel. Tell us if you've ever had to choose between what's satisfying and what's right. And while you're there, hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe so you never miss our next tale, because we have more stories of survival, justice, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit coming your way. The boy who fell into the ocean that rainy November night is gone. But the man who climbed out, stronger, wiser, more determined to make his second chance matter, he's still here. Still fishing. Still building. Still proving every single day that the people who try to destroy us don't get to write our ending. We do.